All right, we're waiting word now on detailed economic sanctions we're going to take against Russia right now. When the White House spokesperson was asked about this, went on to say that the president was open to meeting with Vladimir Putin, but that nothing was reportedly imminent. Now, the Fox News foreign policy analyst Kiron Skinner is joining us right now, former CIA analyst Tara Mueller. Tara, I cannot imagine, certainly anytime soon, a meeting between the president and Vladimir Putin. If there was a sense that the two had, a promising relationship, that seems to have been stomped on. But what's your sense of things?
I agree with your assessment. And as a matter of fact, Nikki Haley was on Fox the other day saying just the same thing about Russia-U.S. relations being particularly strained this week in light of strikes, in light of another round of sanctions hitting Russia. I believe they'll be announced today in light of the recent attack that we took to counter the Syrian use of chemical weapons. And I think you're seeing pressure build for Russia to either do something to rein in and pull back its support from Assad, but I'm not sure if these sanctions are going to be enough to get them to do that, to be quite honest.
We already know that Russia's hurting on just the threat of sanctions, and already anything having to do with aluminum and steel, they, like the Chinese, have been feeling the pinch as well. A couple of their bigger players have seen that entire sector tanking, better than 50%. One big player down 70%. So they're feeling it. A lot of those oligarchs, the target of our own investigations, are feeling it. So, Kiron, where is this going?
I think it's headed toward a situation in which Russia is a lot more isolated in the international system than at any point in the 21st century. So the sanctions are important in the sense that they have to, inflict pain upon individuals and institutions. But it's also important in a geopolitical sense. Russia is becoming clearly isolated from the free world, from the Western world, from nations of goodwill. It has, as of 2013, assumed the role of guarantor of Syria's illicit weapons program that it would make sure Putin agreed to years ago. It would make sure that those weapons were eliminated. That clearly has not happened. It has failed. It has 6 times in the past year vetoed UN Security Council resolutions against the Assad regime. So it has a kind of a very negative narrative, and I don't see a pathway forward for Russia's leadership either in the Middle East, which it would like to assume, or in the wider world.
Tara, one thing that's become very, very obvious is we draw the line, and understandably, humanitarianly so, at chemical weapons, the likes of which killed 45 people in Duma a couple of weeks back, that prompted this attack over the weekend. But hundreds of thousands have died in this civil war at the hands of Bashar al-Assad. Are we simply saying when it extends to killing them by chemical weapons, that's when we draw the line, not when they are killed just by conventional means?
Unfortunately, that's not what we should be saying, but it is the case historically that we tend to draw the line around certain types of weapons use because of international norms around their use. For example, the Chemical Weapons Convention, which prohibits the use of these weapons. So when we come out and make statements about red lines being drawn, we have to sort of follow up in terms of credibility being on the line and also as a deterrent effect to thwart the use of these weapons, not just in Syria, but elsewhere, to show that we are taking those international norms seriously. But you're 100% correct, and that's why even though the strikes in and of themselves, the missile strikes that we just saw, not just this year, the 105 strikes, the missiles that were launched, but the 59 on April 7th, 2017, those strikes addressing chemical weapons use are punitive measures and deterrent measures for chemical weapons use. That's it. They do not address the broader systemic underlying problems at the heart of the Syria conflict. That's going to take the work of diplomacy out of the UN, which is having a difficult time. That's going to take the work of sanctions, pressuring countries like Russia to take action and put more pressure on Assad. And that's going to take the work of, at the end of the day, people coming together to resolve this conflict. Having said that, sometimes we don't see people coming together, unfortunately, until they feel the punitive measures of military action and of, unfortunately, the tragic humanitarian loss of life when both sides can no longer endure the pains and hardship of a conflict.
Sometimes you can look at something as simple as the oil markets. And Kiron, they have eased up a little bit and reversed gains built on fears of an outright war in Syria. And I'm wondering if the signal is as well that we don't want to get too entrenched in this country, that the administration still is looking forward to, this is coming from a White House spokesperson, bringing troops home from Syria. Just no definite timeline there. What did you make of that?
I see it a bit differently. The Trump administration has been deeply engaged and committed to resolving the conflict in Syria, which from our standpoint has been eliminating ISIS and degrading their ability, along with some other terrorist actors, from doing more harm to civilians and innocents. And we've been unswerving in that commitment. And that is a key part of resolving the conflict in Syria. But Syria is in a 7-year civil war. And it can't be resolved simply by the U.S. military presence. I believe that's a more nuanced way of looking at what the White House has been attempting to say. What we have been doing, and is often not discussed, is an aggressive diplomatic offensive. That made the attack on the chemical weapons facilities in Syria possible, bringing in the British and the French and our other allies to look at what we can do in the long term on Syria. It will not work without a broader coalition, and that's what the Trump administration has actually been attempting to develop, and it has been working. Despite the transatlantic noise and the negative rhetoric that we've seen in the past year or so around the Trump administration and our allies on the other side of the pond, the fact remains that we're working together in Syria, and that will matter for the future.
We shall see. Ladies, thank you both very, very much.